This video talks about cropping, zooming, and panning within VideoStudio. This video is going to be a little bit longer because there's actually multiple approaches that affect different assets differently. And so I'll start off by explaining the different approaches and how they affect the different assets, and then explain how to use each of them. But I'll also have separate videos that explain each approach if you're just interested in one approach and you know what you want, but have just forgotten how to use it. So let's start off by talking about the BMP image. And the reason we'll start with that is because when I take a snapshot of a video, it creates BMP. And so when I've selected that, over on the right-hand side, you see there's this options. And when I expand that, underneath photo, there is a pan and zoom, and I click on that, and so I can do panning and zooming here. Now, if I do this drop down here, there's all of these different approaches that are standard things that would be used in a slideshow, but then you can also customize it. So that's the first approach, this pan and zoom. That will work for BMP images. It won't work for movies. It will work for JPEGs, but it will not work for PNG. I haven't checked all the different formats, but it may or may not work for the image format that you're using. BMP and JPEG are the most likely ones that it'll work on. Now, if you'll notice over here, there's a little FX symbol on the BMP. So that's because we have applied that zoom and pan. I can go back to keep aspect ratio and it'll turn off the FX. But basically for the cropping, zooming, and panning, it's all the FX filters. So for the PNG or any other image that is not directly supported, and for movies, you can use the FX filters. So I'm showing the ones that you're interested in here, but I've added them to my favorites. But underneath 2D mapping, you'll see cropping. That's one approach. And then underneath adjust is the video pan and zoom, and that's another approach. So let me just go ahead and switch to my favorites. And so when would I use cropping? When would I use video pan and zoom? Well, video pan and zoom has the nicer interface, but cropping is the one that will do pretty much anything that you want to do. And the big difference is that video pan and zoom keeps the aspect ratio the same. It's really only doing video panning and zooming. Now you can use this on line art or images, but cropping allows you to change the aspect ratio. So if it's okay for you to keep the aspect ratio the same as the source, then video pan and zoom is a really great approach because it'll work on anything. However, a good example of where I might not want to use it is in this JPEG, because it has a square appearance, but you know, the video that I'm creating is the high definition, and so I might want to change the aspect ratio of what I'm using. Okay, so that's the basics of the different approaches and why you would want to use them. Now let's get into how each of them works. So if you have a BMP or a JPEG type of image, if I click on the image and select options, underneath there I can use the pan and zoom. The drop down here allows me to select different approaches that would be typical for a slideshow, and so they set up the zoom and pan automatically for you. So that's the real value of that. But if I click on Customize, then I can go in and use the timeline to change like I would for any other filter. So what's particular to this filter is these anchor buttons that allow me to center things and position them quickly and easily. But let me first just change the size of it. And you can think of this as you know, a camera lens, and I can drag this around where I want to look, and then I can position it up in the upper left, upper center, and different places around the viewport. So that's the basics of the pan and zoom. Now, the options have a pan and zoom that works effectively for JPEGs and BMP images. They don't work for all images, such as a PNG. You can't use pan and zoom. And they don't work for MOVs or any of video clips. But the filter that is equivalent to the pan and zoom is underneath the FX, the video pan and zoom. So all you need to do is drag that. You can drag it onto an image or to an MOV. So let's just go ahead and put it on this image here. And now underneath options, I can see that it's been applied. And if I click on custom filter, I can bring up the filter panel and adjust it however I want. So this is essentially identical to the pan and zoom that works directly out of the box for JPEG and PNG things. So you can look at that video if you need to know more. But the basic point is to think of it as a camera, if you will, that's looking around, and I drag this marker here to look around, and I can change the size. But the key thing is that the aspect ratio is based upon the original source. So let's take a look at another image here, this best one here. And so I'm going to use that video and video pan and zoom here, and I'm going to customize the filter, but notice how it starts off as a square, and that's because the original image is a square and I can't change the aspect ratio. So that's where I would want to use cropping if I want the aspect ratio to be different. If you don't know how to actually apply filters or customize filters, we're going to walk through using cropping to do that for a video. So I'm going to click on the video clip, and then underneath effects, the effects filters, I have actually saved it to my favorites, but the one that we're going to apply is called cropping. So I'm just going to drag it onto the clip, and then underneath options, I will customize that filter underneath attribute and click on customize filter. And so this kind of interface is very similar for all of the filters. There's a timeline down here, and we're going to add keyframes. So you can see the very first keyframe, the start of the video, is red here, and this other keyframe at the end has not yet been selected. So this timeline is the duration of the video, and this little arrow here is a scrubber. So as I drag this along, I can see what happens. On the right hand side is the preview, as you can see, and here's the original, and we see this outline showing us what we're doing. So if we go all the way here and we see that keyframe, that's where it ends. So in this video, what we're going to do is we're going to start with it fully zoomed out. We'll zoom and pan into this head area, then move to this card, and then zoom all the way back out. So the first thing I'm going to do is I want to move this scrubber back to the beginning. I can just drag it manually, or I can click on this button that will take me all the way to the first frame. There's a similar button to go to the end of the frame. Or rather, one frame, I can advance by one frame or go to the end. Now everything up here is common for all of the filters. On the bottom is the attributes that we're changing. So in this particular case, we're going to be doing the cropping and the zooming. So we're going to set the original appearance at the original keyframe. So by default it's set to 50. I'm going to just change that to 100 for both the width and the height. So now we'll move our scrubber over someplace, and I will now try to make it focus on the head. So to do that, I need to first add a keyframe, and I do that by clicking on the plus. Now that allows me to change the width and the height. So this is the clunky part of this particular interface. I actually have to either click on these little arrows or know how much I want to set it by typing it in. So I'm going to do that offline. So that's 15 and 20, and so now I'm going to move into the middle and drag the little plus symbol until it lines up over the head. Now by default the fill color is turned on, so if I click that, now it will zoom in. So if I grab the scrubber, we can see that we're zooming in and panning over to the head. So now let's zoom and pan to another location. Again, I need to add a keyframe, and I will set these width and height. So I'll just set it to 40, 40, and then drag over to the card so that it's in the center of the screen. And so now as I scrub the handle, we can see that we zoom in to the helmet, to the head, and then we zoom to the card, and then we zoom back out. Now notice that we don't really hold it for any time, so how do we do that? We add more keyframes. So I'm going to come over to this keyframe, and I'm just going to move it over a little bit here. Then I'm going to take the scrubber and I'm going to move it over a little bit. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on this keyframe, and I'm going to insert a keyframe, and it's going to put it where the scrubber is. And so notice that nothing happens here. So what I really want is I want this keyframe to be exactly the same. So one way I can do that is to do right click on that and copy and paste all to right. But if I do that, that's actually going to overwrite the other keyframes, and that's not what I want. So if you wanted it to stay the same way, that's how you could do it. So the real way you want to do this is just to right click on it, copy, then move your scrubber over, and right click and paste. So now as we scrub, we see we zoom into the helmet and then we stay there for a little bit. Now we pan and zoom to the other card. Again, we want to copy that keyframe, move the scrubber to wherever we want, and then right click and paste. And so now it will tend to stay and look at that card for a little bit, and then finally go out to the final area. And if we notice that didn't quite get the way we wanted to, so again we just have to change the position by dragging. I can do that, or I can just go to the first one and copy that keyframe and copy it to the end, however I want to do it. So that is basically how you work with this timeline. There's other controls that you can look at, but that's the essential functionality for any of the filters, and that's how you do cropping.